Now, welcome to another edition of Let's Talk Some Star Wars, where we're going to continue to look back at and rank the arcs of the Clone Wars, and this time we'll take a look at the results of the poll that asked you to rank the Mortis story arc. We'll then compare it to the scores for all the other arcs we've done thus far, before I then read and respond to some of your comments, while showing off the artwork that's been sent in to me. And speaking of the other arcs, you can already head down to the comments below and respond to my pinned comment down there with your nomination for which one we should do next, or vote with a thumbs up if the one you'd like to see is already there. Whichever one gets the most votes in the next 24 hours or so will be the winner and the one we do next. Okay, so let's now get to the results of the poll, where we'll see that 51% of people gave the Mortis story arc 5 stars and thought it was amazing, 38% of people gave it 4 stars and thought it was good, 8% gave it 3 stars and thought it was average, 2% then gave it 2 stars, and a final 2% gave it 1 and thought it was terrible. And so when we do all the math here, the Mortis arc ends up with a score of 4.34 and lands currently into 3rd place overall, and a pretty good distance behind our two frontrunners, yet still way ahead of the Clone Wars movie, which again, we are counting as an arc for the sake of these rankings. And as for my very brief initial thoughts here, this finished a bit lower than I thought it would. I thought this was going to be right up there with Umbara and Siege of Mandalore, but after reading all the comments this week, it's clear that there are more people out there who don't like this arc, or at least don't love it, more than I thought there were, and they all have more or less pretty much the same reasoning why, which we'll get to in the comments in just a bit. But first of all, let me once again say thank you to everyone who votes, comments, and watches. I do greatly appreciate all of it. And the reason why this video is up maybe a little later than it should be, I think I put this poll up like 10 days ago now, is because with the video I put up a couple days ago in regards to my sequel trilogy project, where I put out a call for more artists and voice actors, and now it looks like we're going to put together a full-on sound team for this as well. If you're interested in possibly helping or trying out for any of this, links to Discord servers will be in the description below. Anyway, the reason why this video is late, as is the Battle of the Heroes and Villains for Chewbacca, is because I hadn't had a chance to read through all the comments, and I do like to read through all of them, or close to all of them, before making these videos. So that said, let's now get to those comments, starting as we always do with the top rated comment, which this time came to us from Night Fury X, who said, "This arc proved Anakin was the chosen one, enough said." We also then had this one from Anakin Skywalker himself, who said, "This arc solidified the fact that I am the true chosen one in the Star Wars universe." And well, I can't argue with that, not that I'd want to. I've certainly expressed my disappointment with the lack of Anakin Skywalker in the sequel trilogy. His name is never actually uttered in any of the movies, nor is the Force ghost of him seen, only his voice is briefly heard at the end of The Rise of Skywalker. And that the prophecy of the chosen one is never mentioned either, that it seems everything he accomplished in terms of balancing the Force was lost in a few short years. Anyway, though, George Lucas himself has come out and said that yes, Anakin Skywalker is the chosen one, it is nice to have an in-universe or in-story confirmation of this. With the father's dying words, he tells Anakin that he is the chosen one, that he brought balance to this world, and if he stays on this path, he'll do it again for the galaxy. But he finishes by telling him to also beware of his heart, and well, we know what happens next. So as long as these Mortis gods, or the ones, are what we think they are, these supremely powerful beings of the Force, then it seems very clear that Anakin is indeed the chosen one, and was meant to balance the Force, which he ultimately did, if we kind of ignore the sequels. Moving on then, we have this comment from Dan's, who said, "It is my absolute favorite arc in the Clone Wars. I love how it had fleshed out the Force in a new and interesting ways. I heard it gets tied into Rebels, but I haven't made it that far yet. It was a shame the brother was ultimately canned from The Rise of Skywalker. I would have loved to have seen that. He is one of my favorite characters after 3 episodes of development." We also then had this comment from Marcio Campos, who said, "It's complicated. The Mortis arc gives us the final confirmation that Anakin is the chosen one, but the existence of the daughter and son under the control of the father leads to the popular belief that there's a gray side of the Force, and we all know that's not true. So it is good in fact, but needs to be properly analyzed before we jump to conclusions about how the Force works." Also here we have this comment from Westrom, and sorry if there's a ton of background noise, seems like a little mini hurricane is moving through the area. Anyway, Westrom had to say, the Mortis arc is overly mystical for me. I chose to view it as an allegory as opposed to canonical events. Okay, so the funny thing is, not including Abeloth and everything that happened with her in the old EU or Legends, and until the World Between World episodes of Rebels where we see the mural with the Mortis gods upon it, there was really nothing again in Clone Wars that confirmed what Anakin, Obi-Wan, and Ahsoka saw or experienced was anything more than just some sort of vision of the Force tailored to them or tailored to Anakin more than likely. Outside of Morai, the convor or bird-like creature that shares the colors of the daughter and maybe some sort of avatar of hers showing up in the final episode of Clone Wars, which of course is a decision that was likely made after the significance was added to it in Rebels. Anyway, yes, there was the strange ancient Jedi signal, which is what they were sent to investigate, as well as an actual structure that they found, but this could have been Anakin's version of the cave trial, referring to Luke entering the dark side cave in The Empire Strikes Back. Yes, it's much more elaborate than that was and involved other people, but my point is we had no real way of knowing it was an actual real place, or just something created by the Force somehow to test or warn Anakin of his future. This could have always just been left up completely to interpretation or the interpretation of the viewer. Now, I'm not saying I believe that to be the case or the intent of this arc, but a lot of people pointed out in the comments or expressed their frustration about the fact that nothing from this arc ever really comes into play again, other than, of course, Morai in that final episode. It feels like this one-off thing. It really just confirms Anakin to be the chosen one and foreshadows events, which, yes, is very cool to see, don't get me wrong, but not really needed. Not saying I didn't like this arc, because I do, it's become one of my favorites, but it doesn't really change anything story-wise, and though it expands on the lore of the Force, it almost causes more confusion than it gives clarity, which maybe was the intent. That then brings us to this comment from Legendary Goldfish, who said, "Quite honestly, I find it bizarre. I know the Clone Wars series is there to fill some gaps, tell new stories, and create new lore, but I find it quite awkward in this case. You have to believe that Anakin, Obi-Wan, and Ahsoka found godlike entities, killed them, turned to the dark side and saw the future, and completely forgot about it. Not only is it weird, but it demystifies the Force by adding gods that represent absolutes, and disrupts George Lucas's original version or vision of balance in the Force by adding a balanced figure just to get a confirmation that Anakin is the chosen one, which Lucas already confirmed. I know many don't agree with my opinion, but I just see this arc as a let's make some irreversible changes just to make an impact in the audience and then magically return to the status quo type, like Episode 9 fakes killing Chewbacca and 3PO, then they're alive and keep their memory. Okay, so you certainly make some great points here, no doubt about it. But one thing I do want to clear up, and I don't mean to pick on you personally or anything, lots of people said this in the comments in one respect or another, but they all, Anakin, Ahsoka, and Obi-Wan, don't forget everything. The only thing forgotten is Anakin's vision of the future. As far as we know, everything else that happened was remembered by all of them. The arc even ends with them sort of waking up and hearing from Rex that they lost them for a moment. Anakin then says, "We were gone for more than a moment, Rex," to which he responds, or wants to have explained what happened. And Anakin says, "You wouldn't believe me if I told you," which again very much implies he at least remembers a very strange encounter of some sort. Then in Season 6, Yoda at one point asks Anakin about having seen Qui-Gon Jinn on Mortis, since Yoda is now hearing the voice of Qui-Gon Jinn himself. Which is further proof that, again, at least Anakin remembers much of what happened on Mortis, if not all of it outside of that vision. And we can only assume that Obi-Wan and Ahsoka remember everything as well. And if they don't, this might actually indicate that this was just a vision Anakin had, again, if it wasn't for Rebels introducing the World Between Worlds and everything that happened in Legends. Alright, next up here we have this comment from James W., who said, "We saw some of the most powerful characters in the whole franchise. We learned so much about the lore. We saw Anakin being the chosen one with being able to subdue the son and the daughter. It's easily an amazing arc, 5 stars. Also, this comment from Mailman123, who said, "This arc is amazing. George Lucas was also heavily involved in the arc, which is always a good thing. Lucas also made the pretty big decision, but the absolute right choice, to remove Darth Bane and Revan from the arc. There's so much below the surface level here. The arc pretty much cryptically predicts the events of the Skywalker saga through metaphors and double meaning. The mentality of the son perfectly represents the mentality of the Sith, even though he isn't a Sith, and the daughter represents the perfect Jedi, selflessness. even though she isn't a Jedi. The ones are not physical embodiments of the Force, they're physical embodiments of how people use the Force, the dark and the light. The sister dying represents the dark side winning, and when the son dies at the hand of Anakin, it represents Anakin bringing balance. And that's not to mention Anakin's vision of the future, dark side Ahsoka and Ahsoka dying to eventually be brought back to life. I really hope the connection between Ahsoka and the daughter gets expanded upon. It's multi-layered storytelling at its best. 5 stars. Very, very well said here about what this arc was and represented, and I absolutely think Lucas did make the right call leaving Bane and Revan out, though yes, it would have been incredible to see both of them officially canonized in George Lucas Star Wars, which Bane later was in the Yoda arc. Anyway, again, the problem with that, of having Bane and Revan influencing the son, which was the original plan, would have been that it all but says that Darksiders also have some sort of path to immortality, which very much goes against the idea that the path of the dark side is a completely fruitless one, which is why Lucas changed his mind about this. Okay, and let's now dive into some of the reasons why people really don't like this arc, starting with this comment from Mara Jade, who said, "Horrible, horrible story arc. The amazing thing about the Force has always been that it's not a god or a personal being, but just an energy field that surrounds all living things. I don't want to see Force gods in Star Wars. The Mortis gods for me are in the same category of animated series nonsense as the zombie witches of Dathomar, the time traveling in the world between worlds, or the Force wolves in Rebels. I also don't think using persons to represent aspects of the Force is such great and original symbolism. Personification is actually one of the most common stylistic devices to make abstract things more accessible. Think of the metaphorical angel and devil sitting on your shoulder and whispering into your ear. So the Mortis gods are surely not some unique masterpiece of art or something. Plus the Force never needed to be more accessible or personified. It was perfectly understandable and perfect as a concept as introduced in A New Hope." We also had this comment from Joe Mashin, I hope I'm saying that right. Anyway, they said, "I might be alone on this one, but I really didn't like what they did in this arc. First of all, I'm not a fan of showing the light and dark side as equivalent. I've always thought of balance as the actual Jedi way, serving peace for all by opposing the dark side, as opposed to serving a light side that's never even named in the original movie saga. I also didn't like how the 3 incarnations, I guess that's what they are, of the Force were killed, as if to show that Anakin's destiny is just to kill everyone who uses the Force, which contradicts the movies. Finally, the pointlessness of the whole storyline. To me, it looks like the authors wanted to somewhat redefine the Force, but also had a couple impactful scenes in mind, like Anakin fighting Ahsoka, or having visions of the future, and could only put them together by ending the whole thing with the equivalent of, "Ha, what a strange dream." I don't think it's a terrible arc, but it seemed out of place, contradictory in a few places, and overall without any consequence. We then also had this comment from Futurama Fan 2010, who said, "I'm in the minority for this one. To put it frank, I don't like it. Sometimes having a mystical aspect to the lore in fiction keeps things interesting. This episode explains too much and seems too out there." That's not to say it can't be done well. The Wills and Yoda episodes did this much better, keeping the mystical aspect of Star Wars, but explaining just enough so the viewer could understand what was going on. Okay, so I certainly understand why a lot of fans really don't like these episodes. I remember the first time watching them through and just sort of feeling confused and feeling like this didn't fit, like it was too outside of the box, if you will. I mean, I couldn't imagine if in the original trilogy or even the prequels, if at some point in the movies, Anakin or Luke perhaps, had gone to this strange land and had this little mini adventure. In other words, it would have felt way too, I don't know, goofy or out of place for Star Wars, at least in the movies. Now, I've since grown to like them because delving into the mysteries of the Force is one of the things that really interests me about Star Wars, even though I myself have said and truly believe that the more you learn about something like a fictional world or a fictional magical system like the Force kinda is, the less interesting it can sometimes become. As soon as you look behind the curtain and see what's going on, it loses its mysticism or its mystique and luster sometimes. Also, I'm not entirely sure this does a really great job of explaining things. It certainly shows a lot and puts a lot out there for interpretation again. And if anything, that sort of makes everything feel a bit more confusing. A lot of this sort of conflicts with how Lucas has even explained the Force elsewhere, even since this arc has come out, which is odd because Lucas did have a big hand to play in these episodes. And as one of the commenters brought up, The light side of the Force is never mentioned in the first 6 Star Wars movies. It's always just the Force and the dark side of the Force, as if the Force is, if you will, the light side of the Force. And yes, at one point Luke does say to Leia in Return of the Jedi that he's going to bring their father back to the good side of the Force, but never is the light side mentioned. Never is it implied anywhere in the first 6 movies that the Force is broken up into light and dark, per se. Again, it seems to be just the Force and then the dark side of it. Is that a huge difference? Not exactly, but I do think it's interesting to note, and I'm curious if others out there felt the same way about the Force, especially in the days of old when it was just the original trilogy, if there was just the Force and then the dark side of it. Alright, let's now get to just a few more comments before wrapping this up, starting with this one from Evan Orr, who said, "It is a great arc, but I like the arcs that focus on the war a lot more. I gave it 4 stars. Then this one from Captain DC, who said, "It's episodes like this that I would skip as a kid because I didn't understand why there was no action or war. As an adult, I truly see the scope and change this show did to reach this point when it's no longer much of a children's show." Then this one from Jaha Janger, who said, "The original Clone Wars cave painting was more effective and not as heavy-handed about Anakin becoming Darth Vader." And this one from Luke Ekmanis, who said, "This will definitely be controversial, but I really do not like this explanation of the Force. I don't think the light and dark side need to be explained like this. To me, I'd rather have the Force be more mysterious and unknown like Yoda described in Empire. Despite that, I love seeing dark side Anakin and seeing Qui-Gon. Overall, 4 stars. Also had this one from Odin the German Shepherd, who said, "I realized some important stuff happened, but I didn't really like it compared to the other arcs in the Clone Wars." And finally, this one from The Living Paradox, and his name is very fitting considering what he said here. And what he did say is, "The reason most people love it is because of how deep it dives into the mythology and lore of the Force and the prophecy of the Chosen One. Unfortunately, that's also a reason some people dislike it." And I really couldn't agree more. The reason why some people love this arc is the very same reason why some people don't like this arc. It dives deeper into the mysteries of the Force than anything else we've really seen before, outside of maybe the Yoda arc, and it shows us that the Force, for better or worse, is more than just some mystical energy field that binds everything in the universe together, which again, some people love and some people hate. Well, that's all I've got for this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you think of the Mortis story arc. Do you like how it expands upon the Force or not? Or tell me what you think of what I or anyone else had to say in this video. Either way, do leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.